Beijing begins to limit contact with a neighboring province, with checkpoints between them already set up. The move aims to curb the spread of the pandemic. One Chinese-made vaccine threatens more than 70 different side effects. An expert calls it the most dangerous vaccine in the world. The Trump administration considers blacklisting two major corporations. They reportedly have ties to the Chinese military. And Hong Kong's chief executive has faced criticism for siding with the Chinese Communist Party, but her husband may have a different stance toward the regime. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. And now we look to China, an update about the pandemic there. The only area officially classified as having the highest risk of infection is in North China's Shijiazhuang city. Shijiazhuang is the capital of Hebei province. The province entered wartime status on Tuesday. A wartime status is similar to an emergency status here in the U.S. All kindergartens, elementary, and middle schools are temporarily closed. During this virus outbreak in Shijiazhuang, if a person is infected with the virus, other family members are very likely to have also been infected. The virus seems more contagious than before. Citizens from northeastern China also told us similar stories. A video shot in the morning of January 6th shows paramedic workers and police officers setting up a checkpoint on the highway to stop vehicles from entering the city. According to reports, 117 new coronavirus cases were reported over the previous 4 days. The city's bus terminals was temporarily closed. All workers must be tested for the CCP virus, and all tickets bought online and valued from January 6th will be refunded. Vehicles on highways were asked to drive back, while the city's 11 million residents are going to be tested in just 3 days, starting from Wednesday. Another video from earlier this week shows people cleaning up a street with disinfectants. On the last day of 2020, China approved a CCP virus vaccine from Chinese pharmaceutical Sinopharm Group for general use. The company claims its vaccine has an efficacy rate of about 80%. But is it really safe? On Tuesday, Chinese vaccine expert Tao Lina posted the latest electronic version of Sinopharm's vaccine instructions on Weibo. Weibo is a Chinese social media platform similar to Twitter. It shows that a vaccine named Verocell has 73 different side effects. Headaches and pain at the injection site are common side effects for other vaccines. But apart from them, this vaccine also causes high blood pressure, worse vision, loss of taste, and urinary incontinence. Tao counted all the side effects listed on the instruction. He found 73. According to Tao, that makes it the most dangerous vaccine in the world. He said it is unprecedented. Tao's post sparked great discussion among Chinese netizens, but authorities deleted most of the messages. According to Chinese media, more virus cases are popping up across the country. Some reports call it a second wave. But some Chinese people say the first wave never really ended. They say they're still fighting against the Chinese regime's cover-up. NTD's Chang Chun has more.
It's been more than a year since the CCP or Chinese Communist Party virus first broke out in Wuhan. Wuhan citizen Zhang Hai says he's been unable to file lawsuits against the regime for covering up the pandemic. Zhang's father died from the CCP virus in February 2020. Zhang sued Wuhan authorities in June for covering up the severity of the virus. He demanded $300,000 in compensation, but the court refused to file the case. In August, he filed a complaint with the Supreme Court of Hubei province, but got the same response. Zhang says the CCP has tried to ignore the origin of the pandemic since the beginning, instead blaming other countries for importing the infection to China. In doing this, he says Beijing is trying to avoid accountability.
If the local Wuhan government and Hebei government didn't cover up the outbreak, we wouldn't have suffered such serious consequences. It's very important to know the origin. The CCP keeps telling people the virus is imported from other countries. It has been constantly ignoring questions into the virus origin. It has been avoiding accountability. I was very angry, especially when officials made some irresponsible remarks.
Back in March, the CCP attempted to blame the U.S. Army back of bringing the virus to China. Zhang Hai says the regime shouldn't have made the claim without evidence.
Some people speak very irresponsibly. They can't show evidence for what they say. If it was true that the virus was brought over by the US, the CCP should open the door for investigation. Why do they refuse them?
He explained that the more he's suppressed, the more he feels he must speak up.
The authorities can talk, but I can't. I once told local officials in Wuhan, if you dare to cover up the virus, if you dare to kill, I dare to speak up. I keep speaking up and holding the authorities accountable because I always believe the so-called experts who have made false statements are the ones really bringing harm to the country, while my speaking up is a patriotic act.
Zhang added that he'll never believe the data reported by China's state-controlled media.
Chinese media have recently been reporting a few positive cases. I will never believe the numbers. I realized from what happened in Wuhan, the numbers were severely shrunken. Since the CCP lied, I will never trust it again.
Based on a report released by China's Center for Disease Control and Prevention last December, the virus infection rate among Wuhan's population reached around 5% in April of last year. Based on this estimate, nearly 500,000 people in Wuhan would have been infected with the disease, 10 times higher than official data reports. Reporting by Changchun, NTD News.
In China, there is no privacy and authorities are always watching. A new immigrant from China tells us. More on the details by NTD's Don Ma.
Chinese residents face extremely intrusive forms of surveillance. A newly immigrated Chinese woman, Hui Juan, tells us her related experience in China.
A relative of mine, he was smoking next to a power pole. A while later, he received a message on his phone telling him that he was smoking in public. He said, "How did they know that I'm here? If he did not tell me this, I would not have believed it. How is this possible?" The message was advising him not to smoke too much. He himself was very surprised too.
What Hui Juan described is achieved through big data and facial recognition technology. According to a report by British cybersecurity firm Comparitech last October, Chinese cities have the most number of CCTV cameras anywhere in the world. The report says 18 out of the world's top 20 most surveyed cities are in China. With so many cameras, Chinese authorities can monitor anything. For example, in January last year, the regime used facial recognition systems to shame those who wore pajamas in public. Authorities in a city in China's Jiangsu province captured surveillance photos of local residents who wore their pajamas on the street, and then posted their names, ID, and their location on social media to shame them. In China, it's even mandatory to pass a facial recognition test to register for a mobile phone. The Chinese Ministry of Industry and Information Technology made it mandatory in 2019. In another case, authorities even require a facial scan for toilet paper in a public restroom in Beijing. According to a BBC report, after scanning your face in the bathroom, toilet paper machines will dispense about an arm's length of toilet paper. To get more paper, you'll have to wait 9 minutes and scan your face again. Hui Juan also tells us that Chinese people never experienced real freedom.
I read an interview one time. There was a quote that I found particularly profound, which was that Chinese people have never enjoyed real freedom, and they simply don't know how valuable it is. I grew up in that society. I think it's really like that.
Hui Juan says Chinese people do not think about whether they have freedom or not until they're treated unfairly and when they have to appeal for their rights.
When you try to fight for your rights, then you will know what is freedom, what is democracy. In China, there is none. When you or your family or your loved ones don't get affected, you feel that things are fine. But once you are affected, I think that's when the Chinese people will begin to contemplate about freedom and will understand why it's so hard to obtain.
There are many cases in China where people are put under surveillance when they try to petition for their rights. In Jiangsu province, a Chinese woman is facing 24/7 surveillance after her husband went to Beijing to petition for rights. The authorities arrested her husband and hired some 20 guards to monitor over the woman to prevent her from petitioning as her husband did. The couple was petitioning for the injustice they felt as a result of their business being forcibly demolished. There are also cases where people were surveyed for months. Again, in Jiangsu province, another woman has been forcibly confined in her own home for more than 4 months. This is after she tried to report a case of injustice to Beijing. 4 men set up tents around her home to prevent her from leaving. She's not even allowed to buy groceries. The men are suspected to be hired by Chinese police. Reporting by Don Ma, NTD News.
The Trump administration is considering adding Alibaba Group Holding and Tencent Holdings to a blacklist of Chinese companies that are allegedly owned or controlled by the Chinese military. 2 people familiar with the matter told Reuters.
U.S. President Donald Trump is cementing his tough approach to China. Reuters sources say Trump is considering adding tech giants Alibaba and Tencent to a blacklist of companies owned or controlled by the Chinese military. If that goes ahead, it would block U.S. investors from owning shares in 2 of China's most valuable companies. The Trump administration has been ramping up efforts to deprive Chinese companies of U.S. investment and goods. China's biggest microchip maker SMIC and top telecom company Huawei are already subject to a U.S. trade blacklist. That means U.S. companies must have a license to export products to them. On Tuesday, Trump signed an executive order barring transactions with 8 Chinese software applications, including financial services company Ant Group's Alipay.
Chinese internet companies are bullying customers with data and algorithms. That's according to a Chinese consumer watchdog. NTD's Patrick Hayden has the details.
The China Consumers Association says Chinese internet companies have been violating consumer rights. It says they're misusing personal data and bullying people into purchases and promotions. The association says targeted advertising deprives customers of choice, and some of these ads violate the law, public order, and good customs. The association says consumers are the playthings in the hands of platform operators. Beijing issued draft rules in December aimed at preventing internet companies from behaving like monopolies. It's China's first serious move against the sector. China also warned its internet giants to brace for increased scrutiny. It recently slapped fines and announced investigation into deals involving Alibaba Group and Tencent Holdings. Reporting by Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
Now to Canada, where top officials say China is the largest foreign interference actor on Canadian soil. Canada's Public Safety Minister Bill Blair said China has been stealing commercial secrets and technology from his country. The Chinese Communist regime is known to use concealed or disguised programs to silence overseas dissidents, including through university campuses. Canadian media outlet Global News obtained a letter that the minister wrote to members of parliament. It details the threat posed by Beijing. The letter says Beijing tries to threaten and intimidate people around the world, including in Canada, adding Beijing would violate human rights in the name of fighting against crime and corruption. China has arbitrarily detained at least 2 Canadian citizens for 2 years, holding them on what Beijing authorities have called espionage charges. Blair's office declined to comment on the letter, which was sent to members of parliament 3 weeks ago. Prominent pro-democracy Hong Kong activist Joshua Wong is facing a new charge under Beijing's national security law in the city. But the 24-year-old says he's staying positive. In a tweet, Wong reportedly described being happy to read letters sent to him by fellow Hong Kongers. His Twitter account is currently managed by friends while he serves an over 1-year prison sentence. Hong Kong police raided Wong's home on Tuesday for alleged violations of the security law. Wong first rose to prominence during the city's pro-democracy umbrella movement in 2014. His continued activism has angered the communist regime. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S. would explore further sanctions and restrictions on Chinese and Hong Kong officials who suppress human rights. Carrie Lam is the divisive leader of Hong Kong, which is undergoing the biggest crackdown since China imposed its sweeping security law last year. Megan Revelle explains how she went from a social activist to a leader beholden to Beijing.
Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam once said she serves 2 masters, the people of her city and the Beijing government. Opponents say it's clear where her loyalty lies after last year's crackdown on democracy. This is the story of how Lam evolved from a social activist to the contentious leader of a divided city. Lam was born in British-ruled Hong Kong in 1957. A devout Catholic, Lam planned to become a social worker while studying at the University of Hong Kong. She was described by teachers and fellow students as gentle, altruistic and liberal. In 2000, she fulfilled her university ambition and became the head of the Social Welfare Department. She worked with the city's poorest, and this connection was at the core of her early political appeal. In 1997, Britain returned Hong Kong to Chinese rule, guaranteeing the city wide-ranging freedoms. The early years were mostly calm, but there were signals of dissatisfaction with Beijing's rule. It all escalated in 2014 when students took to the streets in the so-called Umbrella Movement to call for democratic reform. By now, Lam had risen to the second highest office in the territory, Chief Secretary. She showed an early tough streak in her dealings with the protesters. It was in 2017 when Lam strode onto the global stage. A committee stacked with Beijing loyalists picked her as the city's next leader.
Congratulations, Mrs. Lam.
At her swearing-in, Chinese President Xi Jinping laid down the line of China's authority.
Any attempt to endanger China's sovereignty and security is an act that crosses the red line.
A beaming Lam strolled to inspect a new bridge linking Hong Kong to mainland China, a symbol of integration. Lam insisted to local media she wouldn't blindly follow China's orders, but in the months that followed, she repeatedly stressed the importance of binding Hong Kong closer to the mainland.
Hong Kong is part of China.
It all came to a head in early 2019 when Lam tried to push through a law that would allow extraditions to the mainland. By June, millions took to the streets as she refused to back down. The scale and violence of protests took its toll as Lam became a personal target and a despised figure for many in her own city.
Hong Kong people will not keep silence under the suppression of President Xi and the Chief Executive Carrie Lam.
In September 2019, she withdrew the extradition bill, only for China to hammer out a new national security law. When the law was published at the end of June, its reach stunned the city. But Lam stood firm with Beijing as it imposed the drastic changes, granting China more power than ever.
This is not doom and gloom for Hong Kong.
Today, the opposition movement has largely been extinguished. Lam is widely condemned by foreign governments and has been sanctioned by the United States for her role in curtailing Hong Kong's freedoms. She says she can't even open a bank account and has to store piles of cash in her home. Long-time observers say she has become reclusive and almost unrecognisable since she came to power 4 years ago. One Beijing official told Reuters the Chinese leadership sees few alternatives to Lam, for now, as chief executive. Some believe she's retained enough trust in China to serve a second term in 2022.
Now we turn to Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam's husband, Lin Jiabo. As the suppression of pro-democracy politicians and activists in Hong Kong worsens, a video about Lin Jiabo, captured 1 year ago, has unexpectedly gone viral. The video shows him as part of a Chinese nationwide broadcast. During the program, those around him were singing a song praising the Chinese Communist Party and clapping their hands. But Lam refused to join in. The song, called Ode to the Motherland, is considered China's second national anthem. The video was taken when the couple attended a celebration performance in China's Special Administrative Region of Macau in December 2019. The former Portuguese colony was handed back to China 20 years ago. Also captured in the video were China's foreign minister and the head of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office. Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping was also present and singing along. Lin Jiabo is a mathematician. The couple and their 2 sons all held British citizenship, but Carrie Lam renounced hers in 2017 when she became head of Hong Kong. Netizens praised Lin Jiabo for his actions in the video. Some compared him to a German man seen in a photograph from the Second World War. In the image, the man refused to raise his hand in greeting to Hitler, despite the rest of those in the crowd doing so. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.